My name is Carrie Ginger, and I'm your host of the Bytable podcast, Know Better, Live Best. Today's guests are a panel of Eastern Iowa farmers who care deeply about soil health and water quality. These Iowa natives have decades of experience in agriculture and have seen firsthand the effects of unsustainable agricultural practices on the landscapes of Iowa. Listen as we discuss the importance of soil health, the problems and opportunities future farmers face, and ways we can improve agriculture for better food and environment. Know Better, Live Best is dedicated to supporting food and health literacy in people of all ages. Our mission is to cut through the misinformation surrounding food, health, and nutrition because we believe that when people know better, they can make the right choices and live their best lives. We are presented by Bytable Foods. They use blockchain and Internet of Things technology to build traceable, transparent food systems because it shouldn't take an investigative journalist to find out where food comes from. Thanks for tuning in. I am here with a panel of Iowa producers, and if you're watching, you can see all these amazing men that I have here. But we're going to go ahead and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and they're going to share something about their part and what they're doing to make a better food system for us all. So let's go ahead and start with Dick.
Thank you. I appreciate being here more than you know. To be surrounded by like-minded people, it's not only an opportunity, but it's a privilege. I was lucky to be born on a farm. That's why I today farm, but I'm also a consumer. For 80 years, I've been consuming the natural resources of this planet, and I'm extremely appreciative of it. Not everyone could have had a childhood like I had, brought up in a small community with a family roots, with all those qualities of days gone by. I'm not sure my grandchildren are going to have those same opportunities. That's why I'm here. That's why I am farming the way I am, with an idea that not only am I a consumer, but a preserver and a protector of those natural resources I've been blessed with. Part of my sense of values is known as soil health. I believe that the soil is the basis for the wealth of this country, and it is the wealth of our small communities. Without the soil health, we wouldn't be here. That includes the purity of the water and the air. So everything I do is based around protecting what I've been so lucky to be able to use, and that would be our soil and water.
My name is Paul Schlocky, and I have Paulie's Red Greenhouse along Highway 13 north of Elgin. And in my greenhouse, I have hydroponics and aeroponics where I grow my vegetables inside, and I do have gardens outside that I grow some in also. And we got kind of like a full-service greenhouse. We have many different kind of flowers to growing vegetables like cucumbers and tomatoes, peppers, and I kind of stick to them because they take up a lot of room. And my customers like those the best, and I do supply to 2 restaurants and also go to 2 farmers markets in the area and 2 restaurants in the area. I built my greenhouse 4 years ago, and it took me about 2 years to figure out how to do aeroponics. It's just a passion of mine that I learned about some things, and I can grow vertically like that and get more plants into a smaller area in my greenhouse. My greenhouse is 90 by 42, and the idea of the greenhouse for me was to be able to produce vegetables in my area without having to have them shipped in from faraway places, and they weren't in very good shape when they get here and stuff like that. So mine are fresh. When people come to my greenhouse, they can either pick their own or I'll pick it for them. A lot of them like to pick their own because they get to pick anything they want. I just point where it's at and give them a ladder, and they can go up on a ladder if they want to, or else I'll get it for them. It's not a problem. It's working out pretty good. I really enjoy it. And I just did it because I felt there need to be more fresh vegetables in our area that are available to people. And I don't charge any more than a grocery store. So, but I do prefer they come out and get their own, because when I have to take it to restaurants and stuff, I have some costs, even though it's local. So buying your vegetables locally is the best plan there ever will be, I think. So I think there isn't a problem with that if people can do that in my area, but I'm in a rural area where there's less people. So if I have to ship my vegetables further, there's always a little extra cost. So, but I do get a lot of customers that just come out to the greenhouse and get their own. I either pick it for them or they pick their own. So on that note, I'll pass it on to the next guy here.
Thank you. My name is Darrell Lansgard, and I wish I could echo everything that Dick just said previously about I'm a farmer, and I'm a conservation farmer, and I care about things besides just the crops I grow. I grow trees. I have some prairie. I care about the wildlife quite a bit, and I just would like to leave the land in better shape to my kids, better shape than when I got it. So go ahead, Bob.
My name is Bob Fassbinder. I am a beekeeper, and sitting beside these professional farmers, I feel a little out of place. But really, as I think about it, maybe I shouldn't. People will ask, why would you want to make your living around stinging insects? And I guess if I could just for a minute go back in time, I grew up not far from here, really. In fact, the spring that feeds this fantastic place here came from a creek that went right past our farm in northern Clayton County. And this was in the 50s and the 60s. I grew up on a 150-acre farm with 25 cows, 25 sows, and 350 chickens. We were as diverse as we could possibly be. My father was into, I guess you'd call it organic. It wasn't called organic back then, but it was a natural way of producing food. Even at the end of the 60s, the best we could do, though, as I remember, was 100 bushels to the acre. But that's what most everyone else was doing at that time. And now when I see how agriculture has changed, I think, wow, I guess nostalgia is a powerful thing for me. I guess I'd like to go back and see everybody sitting on a little tractor with a 2-row cultivator, but that's not going to happen, I'm pretty sure. After a time in the service, I went to Iowa State, where I met my dear wife, and for 3 years we moved to Des Moines. I was an engineer, she was a dietitian, and we got one beehive for the garden and the orchard. And in those 3 years, working for a power company and learning about the little bees in that box, I decided there was a better life than working for a big power company. And so she followed me back up here to home, and we put everything we had into the beehives, and now the beehives are up and down the Turkey River, which flows just outside this building here, and the Volga River, and a little bit up on the Yellow River. I never regret doing that, although there's been some anxious times, and we raised 4 children. They were all part of it. We hired, we still hire, probably 8 to 10 kids through the summer. And I guess I'm proud that they will come back in their later college years and say, hey, I got to do a paper, and I want to do it on bees, and I didn't quite learn everything while I was here. Can you help me out? And I think as some things that these guys have said, and Gary earlier, we can make a big difference by teaching as best we know and just showing our enthusiasm for our environment and for everything that's connected to it. So I think I've used up my time here.
My name's Gary Sigworth. I'm a natural resource biologist for the Department of Natural Resources and managing Big Spring Trout Hatchery, which is where we're at today. I farmed back in the early 1980s until the farm crisis in 1986 forced us to have a farm sale. And so that's how I got into natural resources. But I'm connected to each of these producers here in a number of ways. And a lot of times through my education and job in natural resources, you start learning about, the connections not only to the land, but to others that we share the land with. So each of these producers here, I share from what they do by the food and the honey I consume, by the water that flows by me here on the river. And so all those kind of connections it's a byproduct of both for my health and the food I eat and the function of a river by what producers like these guys are doing out on the land. And so happy to have them here.
Well, thanks for joining me. It's amazing to be sitting in this room with you all and just the wealth of knowledge that is here and what you're going to be able to share with all the listeners. So let's keep going. Iowa's known for farming. We know that you hear of Iowa, and I think people just think, well, cornfields probably, but Iowa's known for farming, and it's always changing, sometimes for the better, sometimes not, but we're all working together. What changes would you like to see implemented in the farming industry? And if someone's really feeling like they want to get started, I encourage you to do so.
I guess I get started. Sorry. This is my Bible, and some of you may be listening, and I'll read off the title of this book is "Dirt: The Erosion of Civilizations" by David Montgomery. And this book changed the way I looked at the world. World history is full of civilizations that have risen and fallen because they eroded their soil to the point where they couldn't feed themselves anymore. It's one of my biggest concerns about how we are farming in most of the country today. If you go back to the plantation days, the East Coast, a lot of that land is in forests now because it was depleted and eroded so bad that you couldn't grow crops on it anymore. So where I'm coming from is we need to conserve our soil. And by conserving our soil, we will enhance water quality. We will limit the amount of nutrients that go down the river to the Gulf of Mexico. There's just so many problems that are solved by stopping soil erosion.
Those are really great points, and that's what I've been hearing a lot. Does anyone else want to jump in on that?
I'll attempt to do that because I'm in agreement with you. However, I look for the fundamental reason why it is I've spent my lifetime, like the rest of you have, trying to convince other land users the same value we place on it. There's 100 different ideas, but I'm just going to have you share with me. Let's talk whether it's ethics. I'm driven by ethics. What's right and wrong? What is our moral, proper way to treat the land, all our natural resources? But if I go to my banker or something, he'll want to go the economic route. He will say, start out as what are your input costs? What are your repairs? How much is the rent? What is depreciation? What is taxes? We condense that to see what is our cost of production. However, if we're going to count things like depreciation, taxes, repairs, how come anywhere in that whole economic chart is not the value of lost soil? If I lose 3,000 pounds of soil per acre in order to produce mentally 8 ton of corn, should we not consider soil loss as an expense?
Absolutely, Dick. I couldn't agree with you more. The funny part of it is, I'm a no-till farmer. Most of my land has not been tilled for at least 15 years. The money I've saved by not doing that would impress a banker.
Yeah.
But it's pretty hard to convince farmers who have grown up reading farm magazines and looking at pictures of big tractors and big equipment and clean fields where the soil is tilled and pulverized, that's the ideal. It's really hard to convince those farmers that there's another way to do it.
But Darrell, if I put 20 heifers in a field, a pasture, and in the fall there's only 19 there, don't I have to calculate that something got away on me? There was a loss. It went under the fence or down the road or something. So where did we not figure that the loss of a ton of soil didn't have any value?
If I can jump in here, as long as technology and whatever else influences are going to keep our yields rising, I don't think much attention is being brought to that, and I'm afraid that day is coming when technology is going to be able to outpace the soil loss, and at that point, wow, what are we going to do then?
You're absolutely right. Fertilizers, herbicides, genetics of our plants, yes, genetics of corn and soybeans and whatever we're growing, have allowed us to increase production even though we're losing soil. And you have to realize that in the United States, we're on a relatively new farming horizon compared to Europe, compared to Africa, compared to other countries that have been farming for thousands of years. And so we had a lot of soil. We have some of the most productive soil in the world, and we had a lot of it that we could lose and not really lose our productivity. Sure. But we've gone through that now, and I think we've lost enough soil now. We're getting to the point where technology is not going to be able to replace it, because the one thing you lose when you lose topsoil is water capacity. And when you go into some dry years, and you can put all the fertilizer you want on, but if you don't have water capacity in the soil, and the subsoil has less water holding capacity than topsoil does, we will be in big trouble. There's no doubt about it. Soil erosion is a very slow-moving catastrophe, and we will not see the end result. I'm 63 years old. I will not see the end result of what's going on now.
I hope not.
My kids may not. But somewhere down the road, you're right, it will catch up to us.
There is a data that you guys know it better than I do. I have some friends in the NRCS, and they keep me up to date as best they can, but I forget. Okay, what is it in this area here, in this Turkey River watershed? Do they use the term? Is it 5 tons per acre? Is it 3 tons per acre per year that they accept?
They consider that the T value, and it is 5 tons per acre.
5 tons.
5
per
tons
acre
of soil
gone.
loss.
Okay.
And that's just a hypothetical number.
That's a number pulled out of thin air. When NRCS first started, of course, compared to the 30s and the Dust Bowl days, we were losing a lot more soil. So when they decided they had to set a number that was realistic, of course, the number was set back when everybody was moldboard plowing yet. We didn't have the herbicides that would allow us to do minimum tillage. Everything had to be cultivated 3 or 4 times in order to get a crop to control the weeds. And so it was a different time. And 5 tons was considered much better than what we had.
But it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
Another way to look at the 5 tons per acre, because someone mentioned that to me, that's only an eighth inch year of soil. And it takes 500 years to produce an inch of soil. So if we're losing an inch of soil every 8 years, we're losing it, and it takes 500 years to produce an inch of soil, we're losing soil 67 times faster than it can be replaced. And so that in itself, it's like you say, it's a slow disaster.
But it's scary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be the end if we get to that point, right? I mean, somewhere someone said we're standing, 6 inches above disaster, and what they're talking about is that topsoil that we're standing on, and that's 6 inches away.
Yep, and beyond just the loss of it itself, as a fisheries biologist and a river biologist, I see the impacts on our natural resources, on our rivers. I mean, if you go out and stand along most of our river channels here, the big, a lot of people notice the soil erosion by the corn stalks falling in along a river, but the soil they're actually looking at along a floodplain, that 15 feet of soil that's piled there, if we went back in a time machine 200 years, that wasn't there. That was some of the best soils we lost like right away back in the very early 1900s. And so there's all that soil out on our floodplains that's piled up there. And then we also see effects of it in our river channels. All these sand loads that are moving down our rivers, most rivers you go on, they're 6 inches deep and they're sand. It feels good on the feet, but to an aquatic organism, it's a biological desert because it's covering up. If you talk to people that fish these rivers in the 50s and 60s, they talk about these deep pools and clean cobble gravels. And so that sand load is a byproduct. It moves slower than the finer soils, but it's moving downriver slowly. So there's those effects as well. But we recognize that as a problem. But I'm always thinking, like, how do we change it? How do we figure out a way to motivate or to people? Some people say that you either force it upon people, like making regulations, which no producer wants to hear. Or, how do we do it? How do we change, and part of the problem to me is even in this Big Spring watershed, it's a 66,000 acre watershed. And just in the last 15 years, we've went from all these small dairy operations within the watershed to it almost all went to row crops. And so it's, even though they were doing practices in the watershed to improve those farming practices, there's so many more acres coming in that it offsets all of that. I'm always thinking, how do we, I look at what each of you are doing, and it's a diversity of things, and you're farming in different ways, and how do we use the transparency of our agriculture system to kind of get down the road to figure that kind of stuff out. For ethanol, for example, I was talking about earlier, I'd be happy to go to the pump knowing that this green labeled ethanol was from producers who did no-till, who planted wildlife habitat on the side. I'd be happy to pay 5 cents extra a gallon for that ethanol. And so, I don't know, will you guys have ideas about that?
Our moderator is a teacher. We have to teach people. How do you force education on people? How do you force farmers to learn something that they don't want to learn? It's a very, very difficult road to go down. And I really don't have the answer for that, Gary.
Can it be consumer driven?
Anything can be consumer driven. If economics will drive anything, provided the people demand it. Absolutely. And it has to be driven that way in many ways.
So provided the people demand it means education. Can I toot Dick's horn for just a minute? Do you mind?
It's tootable.
For the last 20-some years, Dick has turned his farm over for this 3 days a week in the fall, and his target is every third grader in Fayette County, but you go beyond Fayette County because I know Postville's down there. And he sets up 6 or 7 stations of conservation. Pollination is in one of them, and so that's how I know that it's been 20-some years. And so we're aiming at the third grade, okay? And they say, what is it that you're a teacher? It's the third grade mind. That is when things are happening fast, right? But then, as Gary pointed out earlier, you meet one of these kids later on. Oh, I remember you. You were in that whatever we were doing there, the food thing. What food thing, right? But so I think what Dick started here in the third grade, I think we need to keep it going, and especially when they get up into the high school and college years.
But maybe I'm different.
You are.
I need us to talk about philosophical values. I don't know how you teach love, affection, respect. It's something a little different. It comes from joyful, meaningful experiences that each one of us have probably had somewhere within our hearts in childhood was something that said, nature is awesome. I'm a part of it. I have some obligations, some responsibilities. I'm a part of that whole picture. And maybe I'm unique, or maybe I'm lost. But my concern is, unless children like you work with have some real spiritual, emotional connection, some experiences that is an eye-opener. You can teach economics, you can teach conservation, but for most of us here, their passion shows through. And I don't know how we teach that. It is through a personal relationship.
But a teacher has a tremendous capacity to do that. Just and many of them are, what I want to say, relegated to a certain system that they're in. But you still have some variability that if you know these and appreciate these things, you can shed them to the other kids. And I'm not a professional teacher, but I've seen kids come back, and if they can see your passion about something, they seem to remember that. And even though they maybe haven't learned it forever, as life goes on, they think, okay, what about that? And they'll come back and say, maybe there was something to this, I think.
And hopefully they can take it home to their families as well. If they light up about something, they take it home. And generally, parents, they want their children to have knowledge. They may take them on more experiences, but it needs to just be, third grade is fabulous, and hopefully it can happen in fourth grade, and it can have different experiences, so it's not something that was forgotten. And back when I was 8, that happened, and they're not going to remember. It's each year. So obviously we're facing a lot of problems. Can Iowans kind of pave the way for the future? Is there anything we can do in Iowa to kind of be the leaders of the change?
Well, I think we can. I was listening to Gary's podcast earlier, and he was talking about how they should teach more in college about land conservation and various other things in Iowa that need to be addressed, like the soil and things like that, because it affects everyone in Iowa, even if you live in the city. Because we all eat foods that come from areas around here also, not just from far away. So I agree with these guys quite a bit, because I also farm, and I have about 200 acres, and I farm with my nephew too. He rents from our brother, and he has 300 acres to do, so I do all his combining for him. And he does all no-till, and that's why I help him a lot, because he's following in the footsteps of my brother and I. And also I rent out my farm, and the guy that rents it from me, he believes in no-till, or else he wouldn't be renting it. So saving the soil, as these guys do, is very important to me. It's kind of hard to save the soil when we get 6 inches to 7 or more inches of rain at one time. You can have a lot of trash on top of that ground, and it will hold better than someone else's that got some tillage in it. But man, oh man, that's a lot of rain at one time. And Gary ends up down here where the soil's right in his fish runways, because if you got 66,000 acres of watershed, almost all to this area, the Turkey River area and the Big Springs area. The Big Springs area that you have your big spring coming out of here, how many acres does that have for a watershed, do you think?
Yeah, 66,000 acres. And what you're talking about,
the Big Spring goes that far up.
There's
north.
what our spring looks like at times. I mean, and so it's the barometer that directly reflects that. But
yeah,
we're talking about how to change and how do we evolve into a different model of farming. I mean, what spurred you to change to do the greenhouse? And then I'm curious what your neighbors think of what you're doing as an idea of something different.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, my greenhouse idea has hardly anything to do with you guys, because you're talking about farming, saving the soil, have better water resources, cleaner water and everything.
Well, but it has to, what we're also talking about is a whole different food system and how we do it.
Well, mine is for promoting people to grow their own veggies at home and try to feed themselves with fresh vegetables instead of having to buy it from further away. All that does is create a market that uses up diesel fuel to get the crop here or whatever you're buying here. But we also have in cities around here and everything, there are so many people, there's no way that my little greenhouse would be able to supply them that many people at one time. So it does have to be brought in from someplace else. But promoting people to raise beds can grow enough veggies for them to eat on all summer and going into the winter quite a ways too. That's what I do. and they got to figure out ways to store it and stuff like that. But I don't buy any of my meats from a grocery market because I have farmers in my area that I buy a quarter of beef or half a beef from them, and I have it done in a locker, or sometimes I do it myself. I learned that over the years. I'm 62 years old, and I know how to butcher things myself, and I would pass that on to my sons or my daughters. I have one daughter that's works in Ames for agri-leader, where they work on technical monitors for combines, sprayers, tractors, and all that stuff. Well, her idea, which I agree with also, is that they're trying to, since we have to use herbicides, because I used to organic farm too, and it don't take too long for a weed to take over, and if you get weeds taking over, you won't get a crop and you will starve. But our farmers need some of this technology to be able to micromanage their farms, where they use lots less herbicides and they do less tillage, and they're trying to get their yields up, because it's not going to be very far in the future that we're going to have lots and lots of people in this world to feed. And it ain't just up to the Iowans, but it's up to, a lot of it comes from the United States. We have the best soils to be able to do this, and yes, we have to hang on to our soils. And no-tilling is the best way of doing it. So we're just going to have to educate through our educators. I think there should be more classes to teach. We got us guys sitting here. We got a podcast trying to teach other people, and that helps. That's why I'm here. I'm here to help see if I can get the word out, just like these guys are. And as for educating everyone, you got to start out small when they're young, and it will stick in their mind. You guys are saying, "Oh, these kids don't remember nothing." Well, give them about 2 more minutes, maybe they'd remember. Because I got a son, and he don't remember nothing. But I give him 3 minutes, and then he's there.
And I'd have to echo that what we're doing here is probably ground floor stuff. Bytable Foods is ground floor stuff, getting people interested. If you're watching this, it's because you're interested in what's going on, and you can be part of some change by just your demand for knowledge. And I guess that's what we need to do, is create that demand for knowledge of what's really going on and how we can change it, and how guys can change it, how farmers can change it themselves to better themselves and to take care of the resources. So we're starting. This is a ground floor. Everybody here is on the ground floor, I feel.
I don't want to shift gears here, okay? I don't want to stay right in the same tone that you guys are in. I won't say just a beekeeper's viewpoint, a once upon a time young farm lad's viewpoint also, is that this is we're going to be going into our 43rd year as beekeeping up and down these river valleys, and so we've seen a lot of change. My big concern is habitat, and I keep saying, habitat is where it's at. Can we do what we're talking about here? Save the soil, keep the production up for this humongous population that's going to be upon us in 35 or 40 years. They're talking, 10 billion people from 7.4 now that we are. We're going to have some food for these people to eat. Can we do this, save our soil, and still keep the habitat for the other creatures that share this earth as well as ourselves? That's my big question. I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about the habitat. I got some figures here. CRP, it looks like it's going to stay close to the same with the new Farm Bill. 24 million acres out of the 200 million acres of croppable land, 10-12%. Can we keep that at least without dropping below that and keep our production where it is? What do you guys think about that?
Well, apparently we've kept production too high right now with the price of corn and beans. So producing enough is really not the issue. It's how we produce it, I think, that needs addressing. you can keep yields just as high, and I'm not going to, I don't want to sound like I've got all the answers because I don't, but my yields are very comparable with a farmer who does intensive tillage, uses more inputs than I do, and it can still be done and produce well. And every farm, at least in this area, has some corners of the farm that are not very productive. And those are the ones that should go into trees, should go into prairie for the habitat that you're talking about. So there would be a place for bees to find something with a flower on it, right?
Pollinators. It doesn't have to be honeybees, but all and
Right.
cover for wildlife.
Right, right. And that's why I'm a huge proponent. I'm involved with Pheasants Forever, and I'm a huge proponent of putting some natural cover back on the land. Anybody can grow. One of the things I tell people is that anybody can grow corn and beans now with the technology we have, but not everybody can grow trees or prairie, and that's a challenge. But what a rewarding thing to do.
That's right. And so it's interesting though. So the system we have, it keeps going because it's subsidized. It leads to chronic overproduction, chronic low prices, displacing more small farms from the land, and so it just doesn't. That's the whole system to me. Why do we keep that propped up?
That's a good question, Gary. Government programs, from my perspective, I've watched them evolve starting when I got out of high school in '73. Before that, in the 50s, there was soil bank because we had overproduction. So the government would pay farmers to take land out of production. And that system kept in place for years and years and years through different forms and different. CRP is now the modern form of getting some land out of production. Why we have farm programs? That's a great question. And there's a lot of people who would say we shouldn't have farm programs. I have to defend our Senator Chuck Grassley for voting against the farm bill that was just passed in Congress because of the payment limits that people would not put in, that the other congressmen would not put into place. We have huge farmers just getting rich off farm programs, and they always say, well, we need to protect the family farm, we need these farm programs, but that's not what they've evolved into. And I don't know what the answer is, Gary. I've been to Washington, D.C. and seen how it works, and I'm not real optimistic that it's going to change anytime soon.
Do you think it's possible, though, through that tool of the Farm Bill to do it, if done right?
If done right. And
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
It's politicians that are going to do that.
Right. But you have to incentivize. You have to put the information out there, and you can't legislate a lot of changes. It has to be driven by demand, and the people can do that by demanding that they don't see the soil going down the river anymore. If there's an uprising and you have 1,000 people storm the halls of Congress saying, hey, we don't want to see all this erosion anymore, can't you do something different? And it's amazing how it will change.
But people don't recognize that
they don't
soil erosion
They don't
even
see
happening.
it as a problem. And that's the sad part of it. And people are too detached from the land, so they don't see those issues happening.
But back to the Farm Bill itself, I mean, if you could change, if you could change where the billions go to the great big producers that really don't even need it, and actually went to right places to change the food system as we know it, in that it would spur growth and opportunities for diversity and different things and innovation and all these other things. I mean, I look at all the things that even are happening around here, and it's like certainly the possibilities out there for
Absolutely,
things.
Gary. Yeah, definitely the possibilities out there. How do you stop something as large as the federal government with the programs and all the people lobbying for their piece of the pie there? And it's not even a pie, it's an imaginary pie because everything is now debt driven. It's all a deficit driven system. So it'd be great to eliminate waste and eliminate giving money to people who don't need it, but they're the ones who lobby the hardest.
The New York Times on Friday came out with my wife we were on a trip hauling honey down in Missouri, and my wife sits there with her smartphone, and she educates me about what's going on. I had to find out about this farm bill because I wanted to be able to be knowledgeable here today. And she's reading off this article in the New York Times where this guy says, the new farm bill is a Robin Hood in reverse. In other words, they're going to take, from the large corporations, take it from the poor and give it to the rich. I just have one little short story, and then I'll be quiet. Okay. All right. So let's go back in time. We're talking about recognizing things that are happening. I don't know how the rest of you are, but I'm guilty of not recognizing something that happened back in the 70s. In 1970, I was an unattached sophomore at Iowa State, and believe it or not, they used to let us keep our shotguns in the dorm, in the closet, okay? As long as the ammunition was out in the car and your gun was registered with the campus police, you could keep it in your closet. So I'd cut classes, I'd grab the gun, I would go out to a friend who had a big, beautiful black Labrador, and that dog got to know me so well. His name was Ted, and I'd pull into the trailer court, and my car was old and had its own noise. He would get so worked up by the time I got to their trailer, I'd roll the window down, he would leap into the front seat, I would take off his chain, and away we would go north out of Ames and Story County, and this is 1970. You could pick just about any place you wanted to go, and there were so many pheasants. We're getting back to habitat again. Okay, 1970. There were so many pheasants that I had to stay on task to get. The limit was 4 back then. I had to make sure I got my 2 because there were so many. The dog would catch a number of them and bring them back. He couldn't understand why I released the hens, but that's what it was like back then. 1 year later, 1971, President Nixon was in. He tapped Earl Butz for Secretary of Agriculture. Okay, he had 2 famous sayings. One was, fence row to fence row, we will take care of the surplus. His other saying was, get bigger or get out. And people did. Farmers did. They got bigger and bigger. And then they got into the 80s, and we all know what happened there. The interest rates went up, and a lot of them had to get out. And I should have known. I grew up on a farm. I was totally unaware of what was happening, except that my habitat was disappearing, but I didn't realize what was driving it. And it was a political thing that was driving it. So that's kind of where I think we're at.
And there are already many challenges brought up that Iowans and I think all farmers face. Are there any more that anyone else wants to add to the challenges that we may face? And if you think of a way that we could overcome it?
I see it as, we look at the habitat degradation, we look at the water quality problems, but bigger than that, we're losing all of our young people from our communities and from our schools and from the landscape itself, and that's a direct connection of something important changing, of how to bring people back to the land or anything else. They'll never do it what we're doing now. I mean, they just won't. And so what we're doing now is never going to last very much further into the future. So why not think about how we can change that now in a fun way? And it can't be, everybody can't grow corn and soybeans. And so somebody from the top levels does it have to come from politics, from our political system? They usually don't do a very good job at actually changing things in the right way. How else could it change without it being driven by politics or whatever? Certainly the top people in politics could be educators, could talk about and share all these ideas, because we never talk about them. But I see the potential out there of change, but how to not let the political system of feeding money into the industrialized system that prevents all those smaller operations and diversity from happening.
Gary, you've just finished a year of campaigning in the political system. Can you tell us?
That's what I'm asking.
Is it possible? That seems to be where the power is coming from. The throttle is all the way forward on agribusiness, and the politicians seem to be able to encourage that with their plans and their programs. And can we get them? How are we going to get them to turn it around? Is that possible?
My attempt's going to be to take what I just learned and try to, because I always thought many times along the way, like, oh my gosh, the average person knew what was actually happening here, they would blow a gasket.
But you're going to go to the voter base and inform them, bring awareness up, and you hope that will do it.
I obviously tried it in a way of campaigning the normal way, not the normal way, but as part of the political process. I don't think that works because big money has such control of that and the media and everything else. It has to be a different way, possibly. I mean, if I based it just by my experience, throwing myself into that system, they hide you. They can just hide you like you're not even there. And so, like I said, I want to take what I just learned and try to put it out in a different way. We're doing it now. Put it out I want to write it up in a fun book and just I want to make people aware of it.
So if we could get a lot of people with the same message, we're going to contact the rest of them, and then they're going to understand.
Even with that, do you think they would still care? I don't know.
We have to be good at it. Okay.
I think we have to realize the reason we're here is because Bytable wants people to know where their food comes from. They want people to care where their food comes from. Most of the people do not care where their food comes from. And that's the
Disconnect.
Well, it's a disconnect, but it's also the vast majority of the people that our government through their programs is trying to keep satisfied. It's mass-produced food as economically as you possibly can, as cheap as you possibly can. And so we need a lot of corn and soybeans, probably to the point of excess, so we can feed the animals cheap. We can do it as cheaply as we can. So when you talk about a political system, there's political systems all around the world that are in states of growth or falling down. It doesn't matter what political system you have. It's the people that need to demand. Well, look what's happening in France right now with the riots and everything. People are demanding change, and it will happen. Sometimes it takes a long time.
Here's a fun example of demanding change that isn't necessarily come to swords and guns. Because I always often gave this example of what's happened in the microbrewing industry. I mean, if you look at it historically, it was controlled by the corporate interests, Coors, Busch, Budweiser. It was the cheapest way. They mass-produced. But what happened? They tweaked a few laws that allowed brewers to brew beer over 5%, to diversity, something different than what was out there. And look what's happened. It's created this huge boom in the microbrewing industry that's community-based, community-supported, and community thriving. And it's the other part I like about it, it's community sharing. Because you go to some of these microbreweries, they have their competition on tap. And I always think of using that model. Think of that model of the diversity that's happened and the booming economics of it, followed by it, diversity, that's happened in the microbrewing industry. Apply that to the agricultural landscape. I mean, that's exactly what would happen. And so it's happened because consumers love that. They love the community aspect of it. They love the choice in it. They love knowing where that beer exactly comes from, this little brewer right in their community. So I think that the template for that to work is already there in the microbrewing industry. I think the same thing would happen with agriculture.
And there's nothing stopping that. There's no laws in place that say that.
There isn't, but think of the subsidies that get poured into the larger scale agriculture that keeps them in the forefront.
And I could play devil's advocate here and say that most of the people in the country want that system in place in order to have the cheap food that they don't care where it comes from. They want their Twinkies and they want the cookie cutter food. They don't care where it comes from. So they're actually filling that demand. Now there's a growing number of people that want to be able to go to a place like Paul's and pick their own food. And if that demand gets big enough, there'll be a lot of those out there and things will change. It has to be demand driven.
And as a consumer myself, it comes back to that knowledge we keep talking about. I do feel some people don't care, but is it because they don't have the knowledge and they don't think there is a problem? And we need to get this knowledge out there to where it does become more of a social thing, like you were talking about the breweries. And it helps me build that community and those problems. So we need to get that message out there that we need to care about our food. So I think it'd be great if all of you had a chance to tell why you think quality sourcing of food is important. And maybe that'll help drive that the demand for our listeners out there.
I think health. Health is going to be a big thing. Being older, unfortunately. How would I get this old? I don't know. But when I look around at my friends, there's a lot of health problems out there, and maybe that will raise people say, hey, how come this is happening more and more and more and more? And maybe that will help people get to ask questions and say, okay, we need a healthier food system here. Our nation's health is deteriorating, at least I believe it is. I think statistics will prove out, but food, we are what we eat, and healthy food is important if we're going to be healthy. Lifestyle.
And that's what led me on my journey, was health.
And I see it and this is partly what drives the microbrewing industry too. It's the younger generation coming up. I think they're a different kind of consumer. I mean, they are looking for different kinds of things. They're not even in a lot of the jobs. I know a number of them that don't seek out just the highest paying job. It's more a lower wage, quality of life kind of thing. I mean, those are the millennials, I think,
to fit their lifestyle.
That are the ones potential. If you look out at them and like, okay, they want something different. I mean, if we just keep doing the same thing, we're probably missing the boat on potentially changing the whole marketing and what we're growing and what we're doing, or even the services we're providing out on the rural landscape that would cater to the upcoming generations, because it's the future generations that are going to take over. It isn't us that are going to be around, so why not look to the future generation? That's what I see.
Right. Education and searching for that knowledge. What will make you healthier? What will make you happier is what's going to drive everything. Gary, you use the term missing the boat. I don't think anybody's missing the boat. I think the boat is starting to set sail. And I think everything will change to accommodate what people want when they learn what they need to learn about their health, about their food, about the safety of their food, all the way down the line. It's just an education problem.
I mean, one example is genetically modified stuff. I mean, it's like where we're shipping it to these other countries. They want non-GMO kind of stuff, and we're trying to say no. This is instead of, okay, if you want non-GMO, let's produce it. I mean, we're not looking at the consumer.
There is a market for non-GMO food.
Oh, definitely.
And if you want to produce it, you can definitely produce it. That's a demand that's there, and it gets supplied. Sure, there's, of course, the Monsantos of the world would like to force it down people's throat, and they get their way some of the time, but
not all the time.
Not all the time.
And to me, it's blurred a little bit by all the propaganda out there of that are telling us all these things all the time, and we really it kind of blocks getting the misinformation blocks us really truly knowing some of these things. And
unfortunately, you can't outlaw propaganda.
And it is very powerful.
Of course.
Subtly very powerful.
Look at Gary. I mean, you've turned into a very powerful propagandist for the things that you feel are important. We all have, for the things that we feel are important. We're propagandists. Everybody is, when you push your own views out there. You can't outlaw that.
Well, I agree with everyone here on the fact that there needs to be more education, and it almost has to be done in the schools, because they're contained there. They can't get away. They're sitting in a classroom, and they can't escape because there's a teacher there telling them you got to sit there.
They try.
Well, they try because my daughter's a educator. She does fourth graders down in Marshalltown, and she tells me a lot of her experiences down there as an educator. And since she's a farm girl, she tries to tell them about things that she grew up on the farm doing, and what I'm doing too. She tells them about that, and she comes up and asks me questions, and then she takes it back to the school system with her. So if there was one way of getting things known out there, the best is to start with the younger population, all the way up to the millennials. Can't even say that word right. And but they have to be contained long enough to get their attention to be able to get the word out about how they should be eating better, or they can eat better if it's available to them. And but as I've said before, so I got a greenhouse, but I can't feed the masses. And yeah, I could take my part of my field out of production and grow a whole field of peppers, but they're all going to be the same size and mature at the same time. Where am I going to go with 3 tons of peppers at one time? And for it to not get spoiled before it gets there, even though it doesn't have to travel thousands of miles across the country to get here, it's still, that's why I said people need to be educated so they can grow their own. It only takes a little bit of dirt. You can grow plants. I'm growing plants right on top of cement, and I'm growing plants don't have any soil at all. They just get water and fertilizer. There's many ways of growing a decent crop to feed yourself and your neighbor at any time. Just needs to be educated. It needs to get the word out there, and the only way to do that is to have a contained audience to tell it to.
I agree. We enjoy our little garden in our backyard at home, and the boys love it too. They get to go out and pick, and they're constantly asking, when do we get to go out? When do we get to go out? I'm like, not ready yet. Slow down. So, Dick, why is quality sourcing of food important to you?
Well, jeepers, we're all here like-minded, and yet we all have different ideas how to fix it all. And if you spent too much time with me, you'd need a therapist and a counselor and everything, because I've been around longer than the rest of you. I'm not sure there is an answer. I might hear one contribution here and one there. But I was thinking, somebody's talking about our food. Could anybody here tell me, when our kids get out of high school, did they have home ec and learn how to cook and everything like I did? Did they have a shop course that could teach them not how to build a birdhouse, but at least how to build? Our schools still have home ec and stuff?
Our oldest went through with home ec. Second one, it was phased out about then. Youngest never saw it.
See, I'm not sure we're teaching anybody to survive. You go in a supermarket, it's human nature to take the easy route. It's human nature. When there's an abundance, look in my own home, look at my kids, there's an abundance everywhere. We don't appreciate because we've never deprived, we're never denied. It's a social problem also, but I don't know, I swear, I know a guy like me is connected to how Mom used to do, and those days are gone. But I don't know. We have affection for technology. We idealize there's a pill for every cure. There's a robot to do this. There's a drone to do that.
A barcode to identify that.
We, us, are responsible for how things are today. Maybe we need to look at ourselves and did we elect the right people? Did we stand for the right principle? Tomorrow I'm retiring as a soil and water commissioner. That's 30 years. And I look at things and I say, Dick, of all your efforts, all that's been written, all that's been said, Is the land in better shape today than it was when I started? We can answer that ourselves. I don't know where our values are, but I'm glad to be a part of this, and I hope on the way home we say, oh, things are going to be much better. I love you guys for what we're trying to do. One more thing. Ever since human beings started to form a social structure, they realized there had to be taboos. That guy had to stay out of the neighbor's tent at night, or he couldn't steal. He had taboos and rules to go by. Because early on, we learned that probably human beings are greedy. They have all kinds of flaws, and there needs to be rules and laws. Do we not have enough rules in place? Is conservation compliance, when that guy signs that, is there consequences on how we treat the land? I'm sick of regulations, but I do know this. The sign, the octagon sign at the end of my road, don't say, if you have a moment, please pause. It says stop. And then there's consequences. So I don't know. I want to comment on, do we need more regulations and more consequences? Because from what I see in my home and in my area, I might turn in someone who's out of compliance. It goes to a board and they get a pass. Now maybe somebody here is on that board, but there's not enough consequences for behavior in schools, in homes, and anywhere. So I'm out now.
Good opinion.
Well, values are extremely important, so I'm glad you brought that up. Does anyone else have any final thoughts they want to leave our listeners with? Because we touched on quite a few really important topics, and I'd like if there's anything else you'd like to get out there for our listeners of what they need to know, whether it's, like we've talked a lot about knowledge and how important that is.
I'll just say thank God for the internet. I thought I'd never say that. There's a lot of stuff you have to wade through to get to the truth of a lot of matters. Mm-hmm. So we can educate our kids, but as adults, we need to have a place to go for knowledge. And the internet is a wealth of knowledge.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
If you sort through it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it takes time to sort through it all too. So, it's always a challenge, and there always seems to be someone else's ideas out there that pop up every once in a while. And you go, about. Now, the one thing I wanted to bring up about soil conservation and everything that this whole panel is about, and Gary, everyone, is that I remember, I'm 62 years old. I remember way back when I had to moldboard plow to control weeds, to be able to get a crop and cultivate. And, we contoured back then, at least. There's other guys that plowed up and down the hill. And I think I think over these years we are making more and more progress. We're getting out of that mode where, yes, we do use herbicides, but we also try to micromanage it so that we don't have to use as many. And no-tilling is necessary to have some herbicides. And the fertilizers, well, there's a variety of them you can use that may or may not hurt the soil. I'm not sure what they may be anymore. But I think that we've progressed since the 70s quite a bit on soil conservation. And it will continue, and I think it'll get better and better, but it sure takes a long time. There is a lot of farmers out there that do no-till and terracing and strip tilling and cover crops. Cover crops is a big thing. Ever since that came along, I thought that was the best thing that there ever was. Yes, it's another expense, but you're also the cover crop is also tilled into the soil some or sprayed so it dies so that the root system can hold the soil and deteriorate in the soil to add more soil to the soil, so that we get back our top 6 inches of soil and stuff like that through that way. And the no-till with the breaking down of the 200 bushel crop out there, get that broke down and laid out nice so that when it rains, the rain doesn't directly hit the soil and make it wash away. It has to go through a barrier first before it can go. And yeah, there's some places that are a little bit steeper than others, but we're all starting to discover that we can avoid them places. We can put grass strips in there. We can put buffer strips in and keep our soil. And it's still happening. And I think it'll just get better and better. But everyone needs education on it. Mm-hmm. And that's where I went with, teach kids, show them. Take them on tours. There's plenty of farmers out there, I'm sure, that just love to show them what kind of practices they have.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, on behalf of Bytable Foods, we are so appreciative of all 5 of you coming out today to spend the day with me and helping to bring that awareness to quality of sourcing of food and why we need to care more about our environment, and maybe as consumers demand more change, because we know nothing's going to happen if we're not asking those important questions. So I appreciate more than all 5 of you know for coming out and speaking with me today. So thank you.
Yeah, one final thought I had
yes,
as
please.
You were talking about, all this information on the internet and all that. I mean, we can walk around now with this little phone that has literally every bit of information in the world. You can talk into it even, but yet never before have we been so disconnected from everything around us. We have all the information in front of us, but we're totally disconnected. Even though we have the tools to stop soil erosion and all this other stuff, we're, even in precision agriculture and all that, we're losing soil faster than we ever have in the history of the earth because of just the sheer acres and the numbers out. So it's almost like it's like a paradox that we, all this information is out there, yet we're so disconnected. All these tools are out there, yet we're losing soil so fast. Those are things to think about, like what are we doing here? And so, but through this kind of thing and talking about it until we have transparent information out there to really lay it out and put it in perspective and show how it connects to us. I mean, I don't know any better way forward, honestly.
I agree, we are disconnected. And it's funny how you bring that up, how we are constantly, but I think it's going on to the next thing. Oh, that's interesting. What's next? And then you don't stop and do anything about it, or unless it comes up again. It just needs to become important, and we need to keep hearing about it over and over and over again.
Here today, gone tomorrow. Even like Facebook even promotes that as like you put something out there, if it within a couple days it's gone. It's down the road. It's like, what's the next new thing? It is. It's interesting paradox.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So hopefully we can slow down in some ways, because we know the future is going to keep speeding up with everything, but hopefully we can slow down and bring that connect back to our food, which will then help, I think, solve a lot of issues we're seeing. But it's promising to hear some of the insights you have of what can happen and what you think will happen in the future. And I think that gives me a little hope as a consumer of what can change. So thanks again for coming out today and everything you helped to share with our listeners.